Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second discussion in our Spark Change for Justice webinar series. These conversations focus on racial justice and how the COVID pandemic has both revealed and exacerbated oppressive systems that harm communities of color. And we also seek to really highlight the critical work that is happening right here in Brooklyn by our grantee partners. Before we get started today, I'd like to just take a moment of silence to acknowledge and honor the lives lost by the COVID pandemic. Thank you. Welcome back. So I just want to acknowledge first, this is the second time we've actually done a webinar series this year, and we are truly grateful for the support of our generous sponsors, Cleary Gottlieb, National Grid, Santander, and Take-Two Interactive Software. Thank you so much for allowing us and helping us bring these conversations with experts and notables in this space throughout the fall. And to the whole audience, please be sure to visit our website at bcfny.org, Brooklyn Community Foundation. You'll find us for upcoming dates and to register for, we have at least 2 or 3 more scheduled, and they're all really, really interesting. And we certainly hope that you will join us again. So today, we're taking a closer look at the Foundation's Brooklyn Restorative Justice Project, a 4-year school-based pilot program that we did in partnership with the New York City Department of Education and the mayor's leadership team on school climate and discipline. And it was a very ambitious project that we started several years ago, and I just know you're going to be really intrigued by the findings and hearing from the leaders on this project. So the Restorative Justice Project focused on a small cohort of Brooklyn secondary schools aimed to implement restorative justice as an alternative to punitive discipline, and with a goal to positively transform schools, repair harm, and promote the equitable treatment of Black students, students with disabilities, and LGBTQIA and students citywide. The Brooklyn Restorative Justice Project is unique in that it prioritized addressing racial disparities in school discipline and offers much needed research on restorative justice implementation. The Brooklyn Restorative Justice dollar investment by the Brooklyn Community Foundation for participating from the very beginning, J.M. Kaplan Fund, Mary J. Hutchins Foundation, the Pinkerton Foundation, Prospect Hill Foundation, Sills Family Foundation, Weisberg Foundation, and the Andrew Kimball Sarah Williams Fund. Many of our partners in the audience here today, welcome, and thank you so much for making this possible. So before diving in, just want to say a few words about Brooklyn Community Foundation in case you're here today and you'd never heard about us. So we were founded in 2009, and we are the first and only public foundation dedicated to New York City's largest borough. We consider ourselves a bridge between donors and nonprofits to spark lasting social change for a fair and just borough. That is our mission. Everything that we do, grant making, governance, advocacy, is rooted in our explicit commitment to racial justice. To date, we have granted more than $50 million to vital organizations working across the borough. Launched in early March, our Brooklyn COVID Response Fund was among the first of emergency response funds nationally, And we really tried to prioritize and did prioritize support for BIPOC communities. In the first phase of our fund, thanks to the generosity of more than 1,600 donors, this was truly Brooklyn neighbors uniting to help their neighbors. It was really just an amazing show of support. And we distributed 3.3 million in 420 grants in 16 weeks. And this was just a huge community effort. And I am so proud of how Brooklyn really stood up and prioritized its neighbors during this horrible time. Organizations that we supported were providing emergency food and PPE, direct financial support for undocumented low-wage workers, essential social services for isolated older adults, and much, much more. I encourage you, because we just released our COVID report of phase 1. So while you're going to our website to sign up for other webinars, I would also highly recommend that you take a look at the COVID report to really see what it looked like on the ground during those really tragic 3 months in the beginning of this pandemic. The next phase of the fund, so we're not done, as we all know, this continues. The next phase of the fund will kick off in October with an ambitious community engagement process that will enable us to learn from and partner with leaders and residents in communities of color that have been the most harmed by this pandemic, and so that they can identify for us and with us what will be the most critical needs going forward. So we are still very much in this fight for Brooklyn and trying to realize what will be most fair and just for those who've been most harmed by this pandemic. And so I do have to just say right now that you can still help us and help donate to the COVID fund. And one thing I think you should know about Brooklyn Community Foundation is that every single dollar that you donate will go right back out to your neighbors in Brooklyn. And that goes for the COVID fund, and that goes for all of the work we do. So again, I just want to say how grateful we are for your donations and your future donations, because the need is, of course, profound. So again, thank you so much. I'm now going to really turn it over to the experts. And with that, I'm going to start with our Senior Program Officer, Amy Chow-Sheik, who will take over from here. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And thank you all so much for joining us today for this important discussion. As Cecilia mentioned, we just wrapped up our 4-year Brooklyn Restorative Justice Project that would not have been possible without the partnership with many folks. And I just wanted to uplift several people. So the DOE, the 4 partner schools in this project, Rachel Carson High School, Ebbetsfield Middle School, Science Skills Center High School, and the School for Democracy and Leadership. Our community-based partners, Partnership with Children, New York Peace Institute, Sweet River Consulting, and Good Shepherd Services. And of course, our fabulous group of restorative justice coordinators who are placed in these schools and who really took the lead in implementing restorative justice practices in the schools. Sky Roper-Moses, Suzanne Hitchman, Nicole Levant-Smith, Ashley Ellis, and also Siobhan Abney and Terrence Winston for the last transition year. I want to sincerely thank you everyone for their hard work and partnership over these last few years. And we are so excited to share our findings from this project. And we invited our project evaluator, Dr. Ann Gregory from Rutgers University, to share lessons learned and best practices with us today. And in addition to Ann, we have 3 other panelists joining us today who have been crucial partners to BCF in this project. I want to welcome Kenyatte Reid, Executive Director of the Office of Safety and Youth Development at the DOE, Ashley Ellis, co-founder of Breeze Circles, and former Restorative Justice Director at the School for Democracy and Leadership, a partner school in the project. And of course, Anthony Soto, a graduate of the School for Democracy and Leadership and a current sophomore at SUNY Plattsburgh studying social work. We're so excited to have these panelists join us today for this engaging conversation. And before we jump in, I wanted to give you all a sense of our time together today. So we'll start with a brief presentation, 10 minutes by Dr. Ann Gregory, followed by a panel discussion with all the 4 panelists. And I also wanted to share a few logistical notes. So throughout the presentation, our conversation today, please submit any questions that you have in the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen. We'll be answering your questions towards the end of the webinar. We also have closed captions available. Please look to the bottom of your screen to turn those on by clicking on the arrow on closed caption and selecting show subtitle. Throughout the webinar, you can look back at what has been said by clicking on view full transcript, or adjust the size of the captions on your screen by clicking on subtitle settings. You can also view the closed captions outside of Zoom by clicking on the link that we dropped into the chat box. And with that, I will pass it to Anne, who will be sharing findings from our final report. So take it away, Anne.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you some PowerPoint slides. So here we go. So it's really good to be here, Amy, and thanks for passing the mic over to me. There's certainly an urgency today for students and staff and families to connect during these physically distant times. And more than ever, we need to demonstrate our kind of interconnectedness as we're looking out for each other's health. And the call for racial justice really echoes through our streets and hospitals and schools, given the inequality in both educational and health outcomes among marginalized and minoritized communities. So today, in about 10 minutes, I'm going to go very fast and look through some of our findings. And what I'm hoping is, as we look back, it will help us look forward and become even more strategic as the city rolls out more restorative justice programming. So in 10 minutes, I'm going to present again multi-year findings from this evaluation in 4 schools. And I worked with many of these nonprofits that were mentioned already today by Amy. And my first set of findings come directly from the insights of the leaders doing the restorative justice work in the school. So a big shout out to these folks, restorative justice directors and coordinators, Ashley and Skye, Nicole and Suzanne. They provide wisdom and insights every year as they surveyed and interviewed with my graduate team. We also documented lots of highs and lows. And what I would just want to say is the tremendous all-in that these folks brought to the work. In fact, one student said this about an RJ coordinator: "I've never seen somebody so committed to making the school so much better." I interviewed the RJ coordinators and directors and school staff. And my first finding I want to share today is just how comprehensive their vision was of RJ using a racial and social justice lens. They helped students and colleagues see the interconnected nature of equity in RJ. So there wasn't a narrow approach when we're thinking about these initiatives. Instead, they focused on equity in many domains: student agency, changing policies and practices, engaging students and adults in open dialogue, implementing social justice education, raising critical consciousness. Now, certainly the RJ coordinators led what we call community building circles or restorative conferences. Many of you know about these, involved in doing the work. But one RJ coordinator said it well: the circle is the container or the platform for the conversation. Its mission is to end racism. Circling and other RJ practices are the tools for what's underlying, which is the racial justice lens and the relationship building. So I think this is an important point to bring up right away with you today. We also learned in the evaluation that trust and relationships were key to advance the work right from the get-go. In the initiative, there was a very thoughtful approach about adult themselves. So adult development and adult learning. One RJ coordinator said, adult themselves need time to reflect on where they've been hurt and how we perpetuate that on our students, especially our Black and Brown students. They offered teachers a restorative process to engage in conversations about racism and white supremacy. So moving from here, I want to focus on something that any good evaluation needs to do: fidelity of implementation. We wanted to know, to what degree did the initiative really take root and kind of spread out through the school? So to track this, my devoted team of graduate students, so shout out to them, we used multiple methods. We did interviews, we looked at school reported suspensions, and we surveyed as many people as we could in the school, surround sound evaluation over the years, so we could triangulate the findings. But we came up against a challenge right away. In this field, we don't have great measurement for how do you measure implementation over time. And that is something that came out of this project, thanks to the RJ coordinators and their task force. We learned just how comprehensive the scope of the work is. And I mentioned this already, but again, I'm going to hit this one hard home. We tracked fidelity of implementation through a new kind of tool that we created related to infrastructure, for example, had 4 indicators we tracked over time. Every year we wanted to understand to what degree were administrators engaged in offering very concrete logistical support, scheduling, space. It meant thinking through how much the leadership was shared for this initiative, how much it was distributed across diverse groups. It also meant clarifying, how much were they addressing policy related to student trauma, de-escalating conflict, supporting social emotional learning, repairing harm. There was also a comprehensive focus on capacity building among bringing families on board, bringing students on board and leaders. Right away, collaboration was key in getting this work done. One-shot professional development was never good enough. RJ coaching, RJ kind of capacity building in one-on-one interactions in the hallways was done in this creative manner throughout the project. We tracked these indicators over time, and we found that 3 schools made progress in implementation. So we were able to triangulate on that across student perspective and staff perspective. Yet we also learned school-wide efforts included striving, setbacks, and triumphs. So a little bit about the setbacks and kind of struggles. One of the 4 schools was actually consolidated with another school in the building. So we lost one of the schools in the mix. School leadership changed, and also leaders were pulled in many directions related to so many initiatives. There was real space constraints. There was staff turnover, which meant training was needed regularly with subs. With some staff, it was actually a really big challenge to move away from a punitive mindset towards a trauma-informed social emotional learning equity mindset in addressing students' behavior. In 3 schools, so far I've told you, so far it was quite comprehensive. We made implementation progress. Next, I want to talk about this idea of equity in schools. So we were very mindful of thinking through, this is the Racial and Social Justice Project, let's track equity. And I want to just raise here that the issue around school suspension is a racial justice equity issue. And why is that? We know that Black students can be issued harsher sanctions for similar incidents. We know that each suspension can push a student towards dropout and towards increase their odds of later arrest. We also know that schools with higher percentages of Black students, a higher enrollment, also tend to issue more suspensions. So this is the way anti-Black racism can manifest itself in exclusionary discipline. So we were really pleased to see that over the years of the project, suspension rates plummeted in many of these schools. So you can see here from this side, there was a large reduction. Now keep in mind, this is in the context of citywide reform in this area. So as a researcher, I need to say that we see a pattern over time, but it could have been due to many different factors, including RJ, to explain this trend. Now in the early years of the project, in terms of equity, we also tracked from student surveys the degree to which students from different groups perceive similar or different experiences of the school climate. And we were pleased to see by 2019, in all 3 schools we were tracking, Black students, students in special education, LGBTQI students reported similar suspension, self-reported similar suspension rates, similar sense of safety, and similar sense of community. So what this meant was over the years, we saw some divergence in experience of the school climate with, for example, LGBTQ students feeling less support, sense of community in one school, but that shifted by the last year of the project. So that was exciting. We also found fair access to restorative justice. So when a new initiative comes to school, you want to make sure students in different groups within the same school get access to it. And in fact, we found that students reported similar access to circles, fair process, and things like restorative questions, which are fundamental in restorative conferencing. We also were able in our surveys to code these different themes that came out about what did you like and what did you dislike about the conferences and circles. And here are the themes that we found. There was a majority of students answering our open-endeds found positive things to say about circle and conference process. Of course, they also mentioned some room for improvement. So there's always more room for improvement. So in sum here, we see inroads already related to the circle process and equity. But in any project around restorative justice, we don't just want plummeting school suspensions. We want sense of safety. We want positive climate and engagement. And first off, I want to say that the rates of staff-reported threats were more variable across the schools. So I would say in future RJ work, we need to keep an eye on ways to prevent threats to staff and increase their sense of safety. We were pleased to see that students' sense of safety improved or was maintained in all the schools. In 2 of the schools, there was slightly lower percentages of students reporting being threatened, being hit, pushed, and attacked. So in sum, we see inroads related to students experiencing an equitable school climate and reduced suspensions. We see that restorative communities and schools need to address both the well-being of the staff and the students. I think the most relevant lessons learned for this project for New York City DOE and the rollout related to implementation. So I want to just summarize here and end with this slide here. So implications are about approaching this from an expansive, integrative point of view. So we learned that restorative initiatives are not just about kind of narrow practices focused on just circles and conferences. This is about relationship building. This is about approaching school policy in a different way. The work must start with committed leaders who have aligned principles in a relational, equity-oriented approach to education. This work calls for deep philosophical roots, and I'm sure people on the panel will agree with that. The work is comprehensive, as I said before. A compartmentalized view of RJ as the school rolls out RJ across the city, or as the district rolls it out, is problematic. An equity-oriented model of RJ requires a collective investment in surfacing deeply held beliefs about punishment. We need to question beliefs that punishment is the sole way to hold students accountable for misconduct. We need a collective investment, and so this takes fostering buy-in of a culture of inquiry to understand structures and norms in schools that perpetuate racial injustice. Now, to assist in some of this planning, we've actually already presented this to the DOE, but we've put together 12 indicators of restorative practice implementation, which will be linked, I think, through the chat or on the website. And we have a summative report as well that's also available by reaching out to me. And I want to thank you for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your presentation. And really, thank you so much for your work, your insight, and your wisdom, and the depth that you add to the restorative justice field. So thank you so much for that presentation. And again, thank you so much for lifting up the Foundation's equity-centered approach to this work. And I want to emphasize again and frame today's conversation by really acknowledging the critical role of racism, particularly anti-Black racism in our restorative justice work. You know, while suspension rates across the city have really decreased, Black students still receive 45% of suspensions, even though they represent only 26% of the student population. And knowing this, you know, with our 4-year initiative, we knew that it was important to look at the intersection of restorative justice and racial justice. And we were one of the first folks in the field to do so. And with that, I'm going to ask all of the panelists to turn on the videos to start a conversation together. Great, so great to see everyone. And so I would love to kick off the conversation with you, Kenyatte. And so from Anne's presentation, there's clearly a lot of wisdom and learning that happened over the course of these past 4 years. And so in addition to Anne's suggestions of citywide implementation and just considerations for the DOE, what are some ways that the DOE could implement some of these best practices citywide while centering racial justice?
Well, first, thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me today, and all the participants for being here. It is truly an honor for me to work and serve with Brooklyn communities and also New York City that I was born and raised in. This partnership with Brooklyn Community Foundation, as you stated, started 5 years ago. And we started with 4 schools. And since that time, the New York City Department of Education, we've expanded to over 508 schools participating in our restorative justice initiative. And the work that we're at today with these 508 started with Brooklyn Community Foundation. And we learned a lot of lessons. I have to be quite frank, though, and just letting everybody know that racial equity work requires a deep commitment to equity and to understanding the harm of racism, and it goes beyond just restorative justice skills. Many schools and individuals have like our circle keepers, or however, to get to racial equity, we have to dig deeper than that. It requires courageous conversations about race, about power, about oppression, and its implication on our communities. With that in mind, as the New York City Department of Education transitioned, we created an entire division, the School Climate of Wellness, which my office is a part of. Once we created that division, we had the opportunity to partner with the Office of Equity and Access. With that partnership, we brought restorative justice and the lens on equity together. And we've intentionally worked with that office, with the schools that we support now, and the last 100 or so schools, to co-plan and co-coordinate trainings, which has been essential in the work that we're doing. This has allowed us to align school equity teams along with school RJ teams, or restorative justice action teams. That has been critical to make sure that restorative justice is, as Dr. Gregory said, principle aligned. Like we're rooted in principles of equity. We're talking about racism in a very intentional way. We're doing root cause analysis, looking at data to really dig into the root causes of the disproportionality. In addition to that, we've also been very intentional about creating youth restorative justice teams. Currently in 35 of our schools, we have RJ teams of youth that are actively making sure that they are engaged and a part of implementation in schools. As everybody here who's on this call knows, that a key part of restorative justice is making sure that all voices are heard. And far too often, we have our young people who are not part of the conversation. In addition, we started also a student and educators seeking educational equity with a lot of our schools, which is now a College Now course. So again, digging deeper into lessons learned in the past couple of years to say, we have to be intentional in the way that we're actively looking to dismantle these systems of oppression and racism, because RJ skills and practices alone won't do it. Community building, social emotional learning, student voice, behavioral expectations, these are all key parts of RJ in schools, and they are just addressing some of the symptoms of systematic racism. I think if RJ is implemented with true fidelity, it can provide us with a blueprint to reconstruct the educational system as it should be, which is making sure that all voices are heard and harm is addressed. Those are just some of the key ways that we have learned and we have changed our approach. But I'd be happy to kind of go further after I pass it off to my colleague.
Great, thank you so much, Kenyatte. And you know what both you and Anne shared around sort of intentionality around the focus on racial justice reminds me of the core tenet of restorative justice, and that is accountability and repairing harm. But I think what must question and really grapple with, what are we actually restoring to when our young people, particularly Black and Brown young people, are experiencing oppression and harm in their schools, who are being criminalized in their schools, in their neighborhoods, in the communities. And so for these reasons, implementing restorative justice practices and cultivating a culture of restorative justice is really not easy. And I would love to pivot to Ashley and Anthony. I would love to hear from you both about some of the challenges that you both experienced and some of the challenges that emerged while you were both working at the School for Democracy and Leadership. So Ashley and Anthony, whoever wants to start.
Anthony, do you want to go? You want me to go? Okay. So when I think about this work, I first have to name that I am one of 4 coordinators that were doing this, and you all have named them, but to be able to do this work alongside Sky, Suzanne, and Nicole, we shared a lot of the same experiences in our school. And so as I'm sharing out these challenges, they were challenges that were not just unique to me and the school that I was at the School for Democracy and Leadership, but these were some of the challenges that we all had the opportunity that we all experienced. And so I just want to make sure that I'm raising that. So some of the things that I think that we face in the school, I think first and foremost, when this rolled out, one of the big challenges and things that I initially thought about when I was hired was, what's the thought process around restorative justice coordinators being hired to do this work and to lift this load alone, right? And so a lot of the responsibility about the school-wide shifts really landed on the shoulders of restorative justice coordinators by themselves. We were lucky enough to be a part of a grant that lasted 4 years, but I knew a number of them, when they rolled out, people were coming into these grants halfway through the year that they were funded for. And to also understand that this is long-term work. It's a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And so feeling like we were responsible for these shifts in such a short amount of time felt like a challenge, especially when we were responsible for really shifting the minds and the hearts of the administrators, the teachers, the students, the staff, right? The school partnerships that were already in the building. To really make this work and to see a school-wide shift meant that all the stakeholders, the families had to experience this work. And a lot of that, again, fell on the restorative justice coordinators. And a number of us were a part of organizations that also didn't understand the spirit of the work, right? And I think people understood and wanted the work in theory. And so organizations and schools committed to this idea of restorative justice, but they did not understand the spirit of what the work would mean. And so even when I think about Anne, as she presents us and says, like, we have to have a principle-rooted restorative practice rooted in equity. And as we talk about disproportionality, you can't really have, you can know the principle of the work and still not understand the spirit of it and fall short, right? You can understand the principles of this work and still create oppressive circles, oppressive systems in the school. And so really wanting to make sure that, you know, we got across the message that this work is rooted in spirit. This work is rooted in equity, and we need everybody's buy-in. And then one of the other challenges I think that we came across was really like this idea that we felt like a lot of things that were happening, people were just kind of throwing money at. So the DOE, I think they were still figuring it out. When I hear Kenyatte talk about all the things that's happening now, when we started doing this work, none of that was really happening. And I think that they were trying to figure it out. And they were figuring it out through the work, right? Through the people who were on the ground. And it wasn't because they were there, but it was because of the work that we were doing. And so a lot of it, we had to figure out trial and error. We had to really be the thought partners in this work, right? To really kind of facilitate how we get to move forward. And so making sure that we had space to be able to do that. And a lot of times it was just us, right? We would have meetings, me, Suzanne, Nicole, Sky, we would come together and think things through, but we didn't have like a hub or a place we can go for a source of accountability and to tap into a collective wisdom about how to move forward. We really only had each other. And so when I think about one of the challenges, it was that we didn't have a lot of resources to go tap into or people to tap into beyond those who we had relationships with to really think and figure out and dream our way forward. And so those are just a couple. I can probably keep going on because it was challenging, but those are just a couple. And I'll, let Anthony come in. But before Anthony comes in, one of the other things, and this is the last thing, when we were facing a consolidation in the school, so out of the 4 schools, the School for Democracy and Leadership was being consolidated, which was a decision made by the Department of Education, the New York City Department of Education, one that stands behind restorative justice, right? And at the time, the consolidation, it didn't feel like a restorative transition, right? And so you have an organization, an agency that is rooting itself in restorative practices, yet they are implementing this big change and this shift, and it feels really violent, right? And we were a school that were doing the work, being pushed into another school that wasn't practicing it, and really not feeling like, especially as the coordinator at the time, that nobody was standing up to really fight for us and our students who were used to this practice, right? All of our students were really tapping into RJ as a practice. And I felt like nobody from up top, nobody from, like, Kenyatte showed up a number of times. Yes, I give him that, Jolene, but it really felt like people didn't really know how to fight for us to really stay in that school and to protect our students and protect them from being othered, right? To really transition them into community in the way that they felt valued, in the way that they could truly thrive after coming out of a school that was really rooted in restorative practices. And so, yeah, that's my piece. I'm gonna hand it over to Anthony.
Second everything that Ms. Ashley said. A big challenge that keeps coming to my mind was just doing the work as we were rolling it out, like the students that were working with Ms. Ashley and the staff, and like we were all learning and trying to implement everything at the same time. So like Ms. Ashley said, the work is ongoing and it's challenging, but it's challenging for everyone at all different levels. So we're trying to do the work and get to a point where we're all sitting at the same table at the same level, but difficult conversations and situations come up in trying to do all of that. So I think just remembering that it is a process and that it's not going to happen after 2 professional developments and a student sits down with a teacher. It's quite longer than that.
Yeah.
That's it.
And Ashley and Anthony, what you both shared really raises the critical point, something that, you know, I've been thinking about is what does it mean to really honor student leadership and student voice in this work, which are really essential building blocks for building, you know, community and strong relationships. So Anthony, I would love to start with you. You know, why is it important to center youth in this work? And, you know, what was your experience like as a student and as a youth leader at the School for Democracy and Leadership?
I think it's important to center youth voice and leadership in this work because that's what the work is. It's everyone's voices being heard and contributing to the climate of the community. Like the environment is what creates culture. And if we're trying to create positive cultures, we have to have positive environments that students have a say in, teachers. Being a student leader at the School for Democracy and Leadership was a really great experience for me. I learned a lot about my own power and what I can do for other people. And I also got to see a lot of students, a lot of my friends, like grow into their power and be leaders and do good things.
Great, thank you so much, Anthony. And sort of zooming out a little bit, and I would love to hear from you. What were some examples of youth leadership did you see in the project schools? And, you know, what models were most successful in really advocating for youth leadership in restorative justice work?
I think, as everyone's been saying, Anthony and Ashley too, that the youth ownership of the process has been key, right, to moving the work forward. Otherwise, you're automatically not upholding the restorative spirit in general. One of the RP leaders that I interviewed, I wanted to share something that they said. They said, the mark of a restorative community is when, quote, a teacher would share ownership of the space with students in that community to create a safe enough space for students to be able to hold each other accountable in a safe way. So I thought that was important to share. that really in moving this forward, the work has to be owned by the students, right? To the point where there's an investment in the norms of the school. So some examples include, in one school, there was a wonderful integration of a peer group leader program where they trained youth leaders to go and lead circles with their fellow students, right? So it's just this idea of getting to the point in a school where you can successfully turnkey circle keeping over to the youth to lead, to develop their own topics, highly relevant topics for circle keeping. That was another important piece. Another planning that came out in one of the high schools was a week of social action in which the youth developed, picked the topics and the poetry slams and brought people in, worked closely with the RJ coordinator to have this very highly relevant, exciting, youth-driven whole week of activities. In that same school, the youth developed a checklist of, what does one see when one watches or participates in a high-quality circle? So I thought that was kind of some seeds of the work that developed there that I thought could be something the city could consider, is when you're thinking about fidelity of implementation, think about the youth being the ones who are sitting in the youth leaders to say, this could be improved and here's how it could. So turning to the youth for some coaching too was a really exciting move in that high school particularly.
Thank you so much, Anne. And, as we're thinking about these students, another challenge that we've been really thinking about is, like the rest of us, these students have been living through a pandemic for for over 6 months now, and really experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma that's hitting communities of color the hardest. And so, for example, like there's been a lot of concern about what school discipline is going to look like, during the times of COVID. For example, how our schools are going to address behavior seen as acting out, for those learning virtually, and for those also attending schools, and for schools and ensuring compliance with health and safety requirements, like wearing masks or social distancing that might drive up suspension rates. And so I would love to start with you, Kenyatte, because we're interested in the DOE perspective on disciplinary practices, in this current moment. And then we would also love to hear from you, Ashley, as someone who has worked on the ground in schools and with students. So Kenyatte, we would love to start with you.
Sure, thank you. I think the first thing that we have to talk about, and I'll be reiterating what the other panelists said, is about the paradigm shift around our approach and our mindset. That has to be at the center of it all. A lot of this work is rooted in changing minds, hearts and minds, and how we approach our young people. In the last few months, my team, our office has been working feverishly to continue that process, training folks on trauma-informed care so people understand the effects of trauma on the brain, trauma on society and communities. So we started that work in the spring. We also started doing a lot of work with adults about their own social emotional learning so that they're really aware of where do they sit in this. Because if they are not well, they are going to then transfer that on to young people. And then we continue that work this fall. We just trained 5,000 people in trauma responsive educational practices. I'm sorry, 50,000 folks on that, because we have to start with where our educators are. Because it's not, wearing a mask and social distancing flat out, that's not a disciplinary thing. That's a health thing. And so my office, we do handle discipline, but we don't handle health issues. So we've made it very clear that's not for us, because that's a health thing. And so the Department of Ed, because we pushed back, said, okay, they're treating it like a vaccine. Like in the past, if a child wasn't vaccinated, it went through the health department, and that way. It's not something you're going to be disciplined on. But I do have to be I'm not naive to the fact that individuals in the schools still won't get it. So we're really actively monitoring, like I'm monitoring every single incident that happens. We look through it, we comb in and say, wait, here's a disciplinary thing. It said Kenyatte didn't wear a mask, but they tried to code it as insubordination. So we've been looking closely at that. And actually just yesterday, I was going over a few incidents with the Deputy Chancellor. And we reach out directly to the schools and say, you're not going to do this to our kids. So it starts with the mindset. And then the next piece is where we monitor and say, you're not doing that. Because we know and believe that we have to recalibrate how we look and how we act, especially in these times of trauma. Our schools have to be places of healing and not where we're pushing children out. Like, of course you're going to act out. Every human being in New York City has been under trauma, let alone an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old and how it's affected them. So we're not allowing that. We're monitoring the individual cases of it. And then we're continuing to train people so they understand and adopt this mindset of restoration and trauma-informed care.
Thank you so much, Kenyatte. And Ashley, we would love to hear from you as someone who's worked on the ground in schools about what the implications of COVID-19 on disciplinary action in schools could potentially look like.
We're living in a very new moment. That is new for the students, the staff, the admin, the Department of Education, families, and the expectation to do things as usual cannot exist. And I think that some teachers or staff may, because the idea of imagining something new is a hard task, right? To radically imagine something different is what this moment is calling for. And also, it's not something that everybody has the opportunity to do. And so when that doesn't exist, when people aren't able to tap into their imagination about what to do differently, they cling and hold on to what they know. And sometimes that is going to look like, when I don't know what else to do, I'm going to try to discipline you or respond to you in a way in which I would have done if we were in person. And that can't be the case. We really have to tap into one of the things that Kenyatte said that I really agree with is this idea that, we really have to start with ourselves, across the board, families, teachers, admin, staff, and really ground ourselves in what is happening and what is showing up for us, right? So that we are able to understand and see, right? Restorative justice, restorative practices, it is a practice about seeing, right? I think about Dr. Fanya Davis when she introduces this idea of sawubona, the Zulu term. That means that we see you, right? That I see you. And it is indeed a practice of seeing somebody beyond what is in front of you, seeing somebody beyond this moment, right? And to interrogate my responsibility to you in this moment, right? And to understand that we are connected. And what should I do, right? What should I do when you are acting out? How do I understand what is happening beneath that and not respond to you as if you are the problem, right? So separating the person from the problem is part of the practice that we have to incorporate into this. And addressing the needs, right? If we understand that, like Kenyatte said, wearing masks and things is a health need. But also, like, folks is tired, and we see that in the real world. Like, you want me to show up in a mask, and like, at this point, y'all opening everything up outside, y'all allowing people to eat inside. So adults are indulging in this thing that we are telling kids not to do, right? And how do we respond to that? And I think it's about, right, creating space for young people to be able to voice their needs, to voice their frustrations and be honest about it. Creating space for them to not just show up and do math to meet a requirement or reading and just do business as usual, but we have to really create sacred space for young people, for families to show up and say, this is hard, right? This is hard and I'm struggling. And if I say that, I won't be penalized for it, right? That like, I'm bored and it's hard for me to concentrate on this computer and learn because I'm in a room with 3 or 4 of my other siblings who also have to do this, right? That my mother is here and she's frustrated with me and therefore I'm frustrated with you because she can't go to work, because she got to be here and I can't be in school, right? And so it's layered, but we have to create space for those truths to exist. And for also teachers, right? People who are doing this work, they struggling too. And so we got to acknowledge and create space for everybody to be seen and to practice the opportunity to see somebody else holistically, mind, body, spirit, emotions, and to acknowledge that and ask them, what is it that you need? How can I support you, right? That is restorative justice, right? When harm has happened, COVID harmed us, right? What is the need? What do we need in this moment? How do we meet that? How do we radically imagine something different together, right, to meet this moment? We're creating a lot of systems without stakeholders at the table. DOE made a decision about how we come back to school and how people exist, how students should exist without students and families at the table, right? Because they had to make that decision, get it. And also, like, we're going to be mad at folks for not buying into something that they never agreed to in the first place, right? And so really, I think creating a space for people to show up, to exist in their truth, their honesty, and to really ask for what it is that they need without being penalized, right? Without being shamed for it. To acknowledge that some folks don't have certain things and that they need to be able to just ask for it, ask for the space, ask to log off, and then get the resources and supports that they need.
That's so real and so powerful, Ashley. And, you know, we've been discussing how it's important to center the legacy of racism and violence in our country when we're talking about restorative justice, right? And restorative justice is racial justice work. It's racial healing work. It's about collective liberatory practices. And so as a closing, I would love to hear from each of you, 1 to 2 minutes, because I know that we're close to the end of the webinar, about what is your vision for racially just schools in New York City? And whoever wants to start.
I'll start and pass it over. How about Anthony? Are you okay being next if I pass it over to you afterwards? All right. So, I think that I'm resonating with the radical imagination phrase. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's really what it takes, is to think about a whole different system transformation and to really see and recognize humanity and individuality of students and educators. This idea of self-determination and agency being centered is in that vision. And opportunities to really make mistakes, but have opportunities to learn and forgive and repair, as opposed to kind of being excluded and pulled away. I think that those are some of the concepts that come to my mind. So let me toss the mic over to Anthony.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dr. Gregory said, and something else that comes up a lot for me when I think about this question, or just like me personally operating in school. When I was in a restorative environment and like I was able to be seen as a student, like there's things in place for us all to be able to feel like we're supposed to be there. And the work, the education that we receive with teachers operating restoratively is work that feels like it has meaning. Not just doing something to jump through a hoop to get a piece of paper to go to the next place, but actually having intentional and purposeful conversations and learning. That's it.
Thank you, Anthony. I would say that, first off, I got to say that the racial injustice that exists in our schools and our society is so deep-rooted and complex. We really have to reimagine the system as a whole. Because every time you go to fix it, it recreates itself in another oppressive way. And when I thought about this, and I think about restorative practices, the harmed come to the circle to talk about how they've been hurt, right? And in our society, institutional racism is so deep-rooted and insidious that these policies and practices that have affected my community for generations are so insidious that we can't even articulate how we got here in some cases. Like, a lot of folks in the community don't understand the impact of lack of healthcare or housing or educational opportunities, really how it has generational effects. And so even when we talk about from a restorative lens, if you bring me and my community to this educational circle, it's difficult for me as the harm to even articulate how I've been harmed because it's so insidious. It has been so insidious. Because a lot of us who've been in that don't even understand the policies that have been put in place and the lack of protection and services that we have. One real point blank way in education, a lot of young people don't even get eye screenings in the 2nd and 3rd grade. So our young people in our most underserved communities that I was born and raised in don't get eye screenings, hence rather than getting glasses, get left back. Like, these are just small samples of the insidious nature of institutional racism that leaks into education and then circles around. I have to say that opportunities about access to courses, to curriculum, to culturally responsive education, to educators that look like me, that have been raised in cultures like me, is so deep, and it goes well beyond what we're talking about here today. But I just have to lift that up, that this is a complex thing that we have to say, almost to the point, I believe that we have to restart, reimagine it. Because what we have right now is constructed under an idea of racism.
Ashley?
I'd like to take off from what Kenyatte said. When Audre Lorde says the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so I cannot imagine a racially just school under the current circumstances in which they exist. And so I do agree with Kenyatte that we have to reimagine something different. And we have to co-create it and co-dream it with people in community and with our students about what that looks like. I imagine a racially just school that is police-free. I think about the movement that GGE is pushing for in police-free schools, right? I think about not just the content and the curriculum in which young people are able to see and learn things that come from their history and their backgrounds, and it represents what they look like, but also a space where teachers, administrators, and staff are getting their needs met, right? Because we understand that if adults are well, the young people will be well, right? And so having schools be places where, hubs for healing to show up and to happen, where everybody feels valued and thrived, and where relationships are being developed holistically from the beginning to the end, that it is the focus. I think about racially just schools as sites for liberation, right? For joy, where young people are being nurtured and fed good food, right? Because when we talk about racially just, schools, that means that our food is also being represented, right? And that young people are being nourished in a really great way. But yeah, I think that it's gonna take for us to co-dream and co-imagine what that looks like alongside our students and our families and our teachers and our admin. And it cannot be done through through what already exists, because it was never created for our young people to really survive and thrive in, right? And so we have to dismantle that. We have to recreate, and we have to build something new. And it's going to start with the community.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I think that that's a perfect way to, close out our conversation. And thank you so much for all the nuggets of wisdom that you all dropped, here today. I thought it was such a robust and lively conversation. And so now we'll shift to, one or two questions. And so I think we have time for one question because we're, nearing to the close of the webinar. And so there's one question about, the field of education is filled with ideal quick fixes, best practices, professional development that are not done with fidelity, and that falls short of addressing real issues. How do we assure restorative justice is done with fidelity? And so maybe perhaps, Anne, you could address this question, and whoever wants to jump in on that question as well.
I mean, I don't think we can ensure. I think going back to what people talked about and reflecting on Ashley's comment about doing it with community, in community, that the idea of accountability needs to be like in every direction, right? Of students and parents and everybody holding it together in a process. I think the other thing to think about is this idea of readiness for change. And I don't think anyone's ever like just ready and then you go, that it has to be a constant nurturing of trial and error and growing together. So I think the commitment, just to kind of close this out, to really commit to fidelity, it's about all in engagement and transformation together in community. That it's not about a timeline of measuring outcomes in 1 or 2 years. It's an ongoing process of change and transformation and really, frankly, deep struggle within this context that we've already been talking about, that the whole house is built on systemic racism.
Great. And our last question is, can panelists clarify next steps for New York City schools, either in terms of policy or planned RJ trainings? One of the common complaints from principals is, they say I can't suspend anyone anymore, but no one has trained me on this RJ stuff. And so perhaps, Kenyatte, you could address this question from one of our attendees.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The easiest thing to do is anybody in the New York City Department of Education could be trained by my office, my team. I have a fantastic team. I must give a shout out. Ashley talked about the Brooklyn, about the school she was at, School for Democracy and Leadership. Actually, that was the school that was consolidated. The principal and assistant principal, James and Emily, are both on our team, our restorative justice team. I have to give them a lot of credit for their resiliency, their commitment to this work. So anybody in the Department of Ed can really email us at respectforall@schools.nyc.gov, I'm sorry. They can email us, get all the information. We also have a website, NYC DOE restorative-practices.org. We have a ton of videos. You can request trainings. With training, if you send a cohort, we'll also give on-site coaching, because RJ is not something like you go to and then you're like, I'm good. It's an ongoing process. And I think implementation is that too. It's forever going to be that way. Like, as a human being, I'm in process. I'm trying to be the best person I can be. I haven't arrived. And I think the mistake we can make when you talk about a school culture is like, think that you've arrived. So it has to be a process of ever changing and ever adaptation to intentionally meet the needs of the community that you serve, and understand that as educators, we are here to serve the community. So they can always meet us there, and you could actually just put it in the chat if you like.
And I want to add to that, because I'm myself at the Brief Collective, and also Tyler Brewster of Peer Connect, worked with Emily Mittiger and do and facilitate a number of those trainings, but also connecting to other, other practitioners that are out there. I think about Nicole Levon Smith. I think about the work that Suzanne Hitchman is doing. I think about RJI, the Restorative Justice Initiatives that disseminates a lot of information about connecting with folks. This work is about community, and it's not to be done alone or in silos. And so if you're struggling as a teacher or as a somebody working with young people and you're like, I don't know what to do and I can't imagine what to do different, reach out and just ask somebody, can you help me think through this, right? Before making a decision, like slowing yourself down and say, is there somebody that I can reach to, if I can connect with, to just think about what is possible, right? Outside of punishment, outside of exclusion. And trust that folks in community will reach back and think with you, because we all want our children to be well. We all want to feel safe within our communities, you know what I mean? And so don't be afraid to reach out, but those are also some recommendations and some resources. There are people out here doing the work in integrity and in spirit. And so tap into those folks.
Great, thank you all so much. There have been so many great and thoughtful questions that have been coming through. And so if we didn't get to your question, we apologize. I want to again, thank you so much, Anthony, Ashley, Kenyatte, and Ann for joining us today. Thank you so much for all the work that you do on behalf of young people. We are just so grateful for your partnership. So as a closing, I wanted to talk about 2 upcoming webinars as part of our Spark Change webinar series. We have Say Her Name on Thursday, November 5th at 12:30 with award-winning author and social justice scholar Monique Morris and Joanne Smith, founder and CEO of Foundation Grantee Girls for Gender Equity, or GGE. They will be discussing the impacts of a misogynoir on the ongoing fight to achieve gender justice, equity, and liberation for Black women. And then we'll also have a webinar on Solidarity, Not Charity on Monday, November 16th at 2 p.m., a discussion with philanthropist and social activist Abby Disney and Edgar Villanueva, author of Decolonizing Wealth. As a reminder, you can sign up for these discussions on our website at bcfny.org/webinars, and you will also be able to find a recording of this webinar on that same page. Again, thank you so much for joining us today and for your support and interest of our work. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank y'all for tuning in. Shout out to all the people that came. Hey, y'all.
Thank you all.